Hello. Welcome back, everyone. We are doing something a little different tonight. We are doing a look at Vietnam. For those of you who are unaware, we are getting ready. Hey, good evening there, Recon Sarge. How you doing? We are bringing in the traveling Vietnam Wall this upcoming week. And so, what we're going to be looking at. Oh, Caleb, how's it going? Historical Possum, good to see you. We're doing great. We're doing on a different night. I know if you caught a Recon Sarge's Fallout stream earlier, it was really great. Check it out if you haven't. It's over there on our YouTube. We're going to do a historical content notice right off the bat. The following program contains authentic, unedited materials from various military eras, historic periods, including but not limited to World War II, Korean War, Vietnam War, the Cold War, Operation Desert Storm, and other conflicts throughout the modern history. These materials may include racial stereotypes, offensive depictions, graphic imagery, strong language, symbols of hate, propaganda, and historical viewpoints that reflect the attitude, conflicts, and realities of their time. These materials are presented as originally produced without alteration or censorship for the purpose of historical preservation, education, commentary, and discussion. Mission 4938 does not endorse the views, language, or depictions shown in this content. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. We are not going to be watching the Mickey Mouse Vietnam. We are going to be doing a talk through the Vietnam War because we're getting ready to bring in the wall here to Edmond this next week. And right now it's in Bartlesville. If you get a chance to go check it out in Bartlesville, it's there. So part of what we're going to talk about is one of the reasons why we wanted to bring the wall in, and some of the things that sometimes get missed through the Vietnam era. So the Vietnam era, again, this is a war with a draft. We'd gone through the Korean War, we'd gone through World War II and World War I having drafts, but the Vietnam draft was very different. For the first time in history, as we're going to kind of go through this, we had a televised war. There was some stuff we got to see recorded from the World War II and from Korea, but this was the first time that cameras on the ground were catching pictures like this and sending them straight to people's TVs and into their homes. This kind of direct connection to the war let people see it a little differently than they did before. Again, some of these guys that are serving in Vietnam, their fathers had fought in World War II or fought in Korea. They had family members, and there were still a lot of World War II veterans around. So they knew someone who had already served in conflict overseas. And there was a kind of a juxtaposition between generations. There's always a little bit of change between generations, but there was a huge change in ideologies of generations from the World War II generation and the Korean War generation and the generation going into Vietnam. So before we get too far into it, let's get into a little bit of the background of it. Vietnam was originally part of the French Indochina under the French colonial control. During World War II, Japan occupied Vietnam. After World War II, Vietnamese nationalist leader Ho Chi Minh wanted independence. The first Indochina War started in 1946 and it ran through 1954. French fought communist nationalists forces that were the Viet Minh. France lost badly at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. And then in 1954, the Geneva Accords temporarily divided Vietnam. North Vietnam, communist government under the rule of Ho Chi Minh. The South Vietnamese anti-communist government was supported by the U.S. and the French. The planned national elections never happened because the South and the U.S. feared Ho Chi Minh would win. So the United States was operating under what they called the domino theory. If one country falls, it'll lead to an entire fall and an entire loss of that region. So they feared Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, Indonesia, and even Japan's stability after World War II because they were still not fully on their feet. U.S. involvement grew slowly. Advisors under Dwight D. Eisenhower, and then it was expanded under JFK, and then a massive troop escalation under LBJ after the Gulf of Tonkin incident. And so what we're going to be looking at here, again, these pictures were going directly into people's homes. These are Vietnamese fleeing with U.S. service members. Here we're seeing the Hmong people. We're going to be honoring the Hmong people. I wouldn't find it so funny that the Americans supported Ho Chi Minh during the Second World War only to fight against him 20 years later. That's exactly right. I think one of the reasons the Vietnam War is so traumatizing is that the boomer generation grew up in such incredible wealth and prosperity, and the Vietnam War was like Vietnam War was one of the really bad things that happened under them. Again, these are the Hmong people. We're going to see a couple pictures of them. Here's some more pictures of the Hmong people. To understand the Hmong, they are more closely related in our minds today. If you think about the Kurds in Iraq and in Turkey, the Kurds are a separate ethnic group. They lived in Cambodia, they lived in Laos, they lived in Vietnam. They kind of occupied that area, and they didn't have their own nation, but they had their own unique ethnic makeup and their own unique ethnic culture. And none of the surrounding countries really respected that culture. And so they lived in the mountains. They lived in a very rough rural area. And the Hmong people were desperate to fight on the side of the Americans because they saw themselves being trampled under the Vietnamese, especially under Ho Chi Minh. So here's we had the North and South Vietnam. This was the same kind of thing that happened with Korea. There was a North and South Korea. The North invaded, Vietnamese invaded down into South Vietnam, and that's what kicked the war off. So here we have the timeline, 1955 through 1975. Strength, on the North Vietnamese side, you had 860,000. On the South Vietnamese side, with U.S. support, 1.42 million casualties. The North Vietnamese lost 667,000, whereas on the other side, it was only 392,000 total losses. Was it 4.2 million on both sides. North Vietnamese, USSR, U.S. troops withdrew, communist regime in the whole Vietnam. So we're going to get into that here a little bit. Here's a POW encampment right here and there. There was still a North and South. So there was for several years a North Vietnam and a South Vietnam, like there is a North and a South Korea. Sorry, I may not have phrased that clearly. There was a North Vietnam and a South Vietnam, the same kind of thing that was going on with Korea, North Korea, South Korea. And it was the same kind of the conflict where the North, so when the Korean War, the North Koreans actually invaded into South Korea, and that's what started the Korean War. Same thing here, the North Vietnamese invaded into South Vietnam, and that's what kicked off the war. Here we're seeing a prisoner of war being taken by the North Vietnamese, the Viet Cong. And here's one of the more still contentious things along with with Vietnam veterans. This is Jane Fonda. They called her Hanoi Jane. This is her being pictured with anti-aircraft guns, and actually in these pictures right here, while she's making goofy faces and getting pictures taken, they are actually shooting down U.S. planes at this current time when this picture was taken. She is one of the most hated people by Vietnam era veterans. And one of the reasons why is she went and actually filmed POWs in POW prison camps and was showing how well they were being treated and talking about how communism and the communists were in the right and that people should just accept what's going on here and we should pull out. And again, she made a lot of these mockery photos of the Viet Cong actually attacking and killing Americans. And so a lot of Korean War, or a lot of Vietnam veterans believed that she should be tried as a traitor. Because if she had done this during World War II, if she would have went and posed with the Nazis during World War II, we would have absolutely tried her for as a traitor and probably up for war crimes as well. But it was one of the first wars that we're actually seeing Hollywood take a side on. Previously, well, not take a side on, take the opposite side on. In every other conflict up to this point, Hollywood had become extremely patriotic and pushed how the American way should be pushed forward. We've covered that. We've covered that with the Batman shorts. We've covered that with Superman. We've covered that with Looney Tunes and Disney, and all of these other groups were putting out wildly patriotic stuff during Korea and during World War II. And then when we got to Vietnam, we started seeing this huge anti-Vietnam come out of Hollywood. And it's the first time that there wasn't censorship boards and things like that put in place that stopped them from doing that. So these actors and actresses were able to go through and absolutely put out a bunch of information that was negative about us being involved in this war. And that led to public opinion shifting, especially along generational lines. Vietnam veterans came back to some of the worst conditions imaginable. There is a song called Born in the USA by Bruce Springsteen that a lot of people think is actually patriotic, and it is very, very not patriotic at all. It's talking about how a Vietnam veteran came back to their small town, and you couldn't get VA benefits, you couldn't get a job, you were being looked at and spit on by people who were supposedly going to be there to have your back. Well, to be fair, I think Hollywood was supporting the Vietnam War for the first couple of years. It was only after it became a horrific, grueling slug that was. So there were some that supported it for the first couple of years. There were others that from the jump were against the war. Part of what they were seeing was the slog that came from Korea, where we went in there and fought in Korea, and we ended up with the same border that we had before. And one of the other things that's a big change, and why it was that slog, did Reagan know? That was a Reagan campaign song, which blows my mind. I don't know why anybody picked that as a campaign song. One of the reasons that we're starting to see something different from Korea and Vietnam than we saw in World War II is also a change in warfare doctrine. Anyone who served in the post-World War II era, so guys fighting in Iraq, Afghanistan, the first Desert Storm, will know that there is a thing called Rules of Engagement, ROE. And this became a period of ROE. You could only engage if certain things were met forward. So, for example, if you're on a convoy and they are firing anything less than a crew-served weapon, we were not allowed to full-on engage them. You just had to take the shots. That is not how America won World War II or World War I. World War II and World War I is if an enemy was there, you engaged. You didn't have to let them shoot first. You didn't have to have them show capabilities of taking you out first. And that was a big change for the Korean War and the Vietnam War. For the first time, and it doesn't seem like that. Some people think that America was just absolutely going in there and decimating. We had the weapons to do it, and we were hitting hard, but we were also pulling a lot of our punches. The biggest reason America could not win. So we're going to address that as well. America did not lose the Vietnam War. That is another misconception, a lapse in history. America fought to a standstill where there was a South Vietnam and a North Vietnam, and then pulled out. Once we pulled out, the moment the Americans pulled out, we had signed a peace treaty between North and South Vietnam. The war was over. And immediately, North Vietnam came back in and just steamrolled South Vietnam. South Vietnam never developed the capabilities logistically or politically to take care of themselves. The biggest reason why America could not win, they never win. They could not invade North Vietnam because if they did, it would start World War III. So we actually did invade North Vietnam. We couldn't go further in. The other thing was those camps, just like how in World War II we talked about them coming up through different areas of China and coming in through Indochina to supply the Chinese to fight against the Japanese. We would not follow the trails in. Japan had done that during World War II, and we would not do it. So we were operating in such limited lanes that it was fighting with one eye, one hand, and one foot. And that is the policy that we still have today as America. We do not go in and fight total wars anymore. We fight contained, extremely rule limited, extremely rule heavy wars. And that's never been how anyone wins a war. So we're going to show a few other things. So when they came back, this was called the National Scar for a while. It had several different names. This is the Vietnam Memorial. This memorial was incredibly important to get built because a lot of Vietnam veterans came home and felt like that their service was discounted and kind of looked down on. And so putting this monument in here was a great way of trying to heal that great hurt that was going on in the nation. And so, as you can see here, there's the Washington Monument in the background. You can see the names etched across it with the lights. It's very subtle. It's not as flashy as some. It is meant to be a reflection point, and the stone is shined so much that you can actually see your reflection off of it. And that's done that way on purpose. And so this was one of those ways they were trying to heal the wound of Vietnam. Seeing the mist in the background with the soldiers. This was really important, and that's the reason the traveling wall is so important today, is because this was an era where, again, today you'll hear people talk about we're on the brink of breaking into a civil war in the United States. This was the first time that thought really came back into mind since the actual Civil War, because the country was so divided. We're going to be showing some. These are not talking videos. This is a lot of footage and film from the Vietnam War. Airdrops in. We got a lot of stuff to cover in here. So again, did the United States lose the Vietnam War? No. The U.S. military fought the majority and won the majority of all engagements. Ia Drang, Tet counteroffensive, the Quai Son defense, the large-scale air campaigns. Vietnam suffered enormous casualties that they could not go through and make up easily. Politically, the war became unstable in America because political opinion collapsed. Protesters began growing and growing and growing. The trust in the government fell, and draft anger exploded. So the U.S. withdrew combat troops in 1973 after the Paris Peace Accords. South Vietnam fell in 1975, 2 years after most U.S. combat forces had left the country. That distinction is important historically. The U.S. military was not driven out in a battlefield surrender, like some people imagine. It was not the U.S. military lost and barely escaped. It was, what are your thoughts on how things would have gone had LBJ allowed a full air campaign instead of gradualism? No, I'm not saying that America's on the brink of civil war. There are people, if you go online, you see that a lot. Oh, we think America's on the brink of breaking apart, that kind of thing. It's, again, a talking point of a small group. But the first time you were seeing that was on the news and on different things throughout Vietnam War. But I think it wasn't LBJ. I think if we would have looked at... So this is kind of a fallover and a holdover from the Korean War. When the Korean War started, General MacArthur was in charge of the Korean War. And his thought was, we have the nuclear bomb and the Soviets don't, we should use it. We should drop it on North Vietnam and end this war on day one. Or North Korea, sorry, on day one. And everyone else said no, and they fired General MacArthur for that. The next several generals that tried to take over were pushing for a World War II style conflict. Let's push through and push them out completely and hold the line. They were fired for that as well. So by the time we get to Vietnam from Korea, you have generals who are less apt to push for a full dominance campaign. You're now dealing with this new ROE practice and principle of warfare, where no one's willing to push on a full scale. We're going to go in, we're going to take them, we're going to push them back. It became this whole other thing of, okay, what areas should we attack? Should we avoid these areas and avoid those other areas? Well, these are mainly civilian populations. It's going to play bad on TV, so we don't want to push past them and take those areas and risk having negativity on TV. And that's where we started seeing wars were no longer being fought for tactical control or tactical aggression. They were no longer being fought for necessarily the most strategic advantages. They were being fought for strategic advantages that would not look bad on TV. And Vietnam was horrendously abused in that system of what is going to look bad on TV and what is going to cause the news to potentially talk bad about us. And so fighting a war from that standpoint, you will never win. And that's the reason it's been very hard for the United States to fully win a war since World War II, is because of this new principle that we have of the ROE and the TV war. So some of the other things we're looking at is American POWs in North Vietnamese Vietnam experienced torture, isolation, beatings, forced confessions, propaganda use, and the most famous was the Hanoi Hilton. It's the How Low prison. Some of the famous POWs that were there were John McCain, James Stockdale. Many of the POWs returned to a divided country where the war itself had become controversial. And part of that was like the Jane Fonda effect. Jane Fonda remains one of the most controversial Vietnam era figures. In 1972, she visited North Vietnam. She was photographed on North Vietnamese anti-aircraft guns. There was actually video of her shooting anti-aircraft guns at American planes. Many veterans viewed this as a betrayal, the propaganda supporting the enemy, and deeply disrespectful to the POWs. There's a story of Jane Fonda going through and doing a tour of a POW camp. And they only were showing the healthier POWs to her. And someone had slipped her a list of all the POWs in the camp, knowing that she was going back to the United States after this was over. And when she finished the tour, she walked up to the person in charge of the POW camp and handed them the list that was handed by that prisoner. Shortly after, the North Vietnamese filmed the execution of that prisoner that handed the list to Jane Fonda. And so they felt like on that grounds alone, she should have been tried for treason. Because had she gotten that list out, she could have gotten out a list of names of who was being held hostage and where they're being held hostage at, and potentially had an army come in for an attack to free those prisoners. But instead, she decided to hand it back over to the person in charge of that prisoner of war camp. And she came home to accolades and more movie deals and everything else. And there are Vietnam veterans still to this day that if Jane Fonda is in it, they will not watch it. Do you remember seeing The Fall of Kabul? I do remember seeing The Fall of Kabul. My position in the VFW was one that when the fall of Kabul was happening, I was having to reach out to veterans and talk to them about their emotions and how they were feeling about it. And one of the groups that was greatly affected were Vietnam veterans who said that they were seeing the fall of Saigon for the second time, especially with the deaths of several of the U.S. service members that were still on the ground as they were trying to get everything out of there, because that happened as well in Saigon. Talking to some of the Vietnam veterans, that was a period of several weeks. I know Recon Sarge or Historic Opossum may be able to chime in because I know they were there with me during those time periods. There was about a month where we were having to tell veterans to stop turning on their TV because they continued to show it and the damage of watching it. And afterwards, a lot of, I'll speak from my own experience, a lot of us felt like with that, what was our service really about at that point? What was the point of what we did? And a lot of us end up turning to some Vietnam veterans who remembered the fall of Saigon and talked to us about how they felt and how that our service mattered. Those of us who had lost people that were closer than siblings, their service still mattered. It wasn't something that was wasted. And they had World War II veterans and Korean War veterans as Vietnam veterans to look back to, but they didn't have that. The World War II veterans came home to ticker tape parades. The Korean veterans were largely ignored, unfortunately. And then there's a lot of correlation between Iraq and Afghanistan veterans and Vietnam veterans. And I remember flying in at one point to an airport in California and getting booed at and spit at because there were protests to the wars at the time. And luckily I had some Vietnam veterans in my life that I could turn to and talk to about, hey, is this kind of what you experienced when you came home? And it absolutely was, and the greater sense of it. So Cabal and the fall of Cabal and the fall of Saigon are deeply linked, and it has linked Vietnam veterans and Iraq, Afghanistan veterans so extremely close that it's decades apart, but at the same time, it kind of lands in the exact same place. And so for a lot of us, there was that really deeper connection that mended. I know some people that fought in Iraq and Afghanistan who had parents who fought in Vietnam. That actually brought them closer, where it's okay, I can feel your pain and you can feel my pain in this. And it's a very harrowing thing. So unlike World War II, there were a few parades, little public celebration, and divided public opinion. Some veterans report being called names, being blamed for the war, struggling with reintegration. Reintegration is such a hard thing, and it doesn't seem like it. You serve in the military, even if you only served in the military for a few years. It's such a different mindset and it's so totally different era of being that when you come back into society, whether you served in conflict or not, it can be a difficult challenge. But those of us that served in conflict, I know getting out of the military and then getting your first civilian job afterward, especially if it's something that's, let's say it's in retail. You get a job at retail and you have a store manager who are like, this is life and death. And it's like, this isn't life and death. I've been at places where people have been shooting at me. I don't know why you're blowing this up. This is about hangers. It's not that important. We probably could deal with this on a much easier level. Just very glad that those guys reached out and understood that if you call someone, you will absolutely, and that is a big spot of where we were having, and that's one of the things that I'm glad that's part of the reason we've started doing these is having the ability to reach out there and grab other veterans and kind of talk about, hey, what's going on? How are you doing? And that's the reason we open it up for all those that have served, all those that are serving, and all those that support, is because it's building that community is so very important. And we kind of got this idea in those days following the fall of Kabul. And it really, really did kind of open our eyes to finding a new way of reaching out and creating a place online that was safe for anybody coming in. Some of the stories are exaggerated over time, but the broader feeling of alienation among many veterans was real. Vietnam also played a huge major role in modern recognition of PTSD and what it was like, because PTSD and combat trauma and long-term psychological effects of war, they'll stay with you for your entire life. A lot of people don't realize how much those effects really get into your brain and kind of change the whole dynamic of how you think and how you think about your daily life, how you think about different scenarios, how you dream, how you sleep. And Vietnam really kind of drew a light to that, even though the PTSD and things may be oversimplified at some points and over dramatized at others. You have the classic First Blood movies, things like that, but it was starting to draw a thing of you come back with psychological scars from being in war. It's not the glamour and the confetti that people think it is. And that's where a lot of Vietnam veterans came back, and you started seeing alcohol come into the service organizations more than ever before. The VFW, American Legion, some of those other service organizations started seeing a lot of alcohol because it was a way that a lot of veterans were self-medicating. Whereas one of the good things that we're seeing right now with Iraq, Afghanistan veterans, more and more we're seeing them pull away from the alcohol and pull away from that self-medication. It still happens, but it's becoming less glamorized to do that, and they're starting to spend more time around their own families and spend more time trying to find other outlets for PTSD and those other traumatic memories and images that are stuck in their mind. And we're seeing Vietnam veterans start to embrace that as well and find ways of healing. Vietnam was often considered the first television war. We talked about that. There was actual combat footage shown nightly, casualty lists on TV, burning villages, protests, draft coverage was all put on TV, something that had never happened before. This changed public perception dramatically. Hollywood became extremely skeptical about the war, and they were using tools and other resources as outlets. One of the world's most famous was the show MASH. I think it still has the record for the most watched TV series finale of all time. MASH was about the Korean War, but it was filmed during the Vietnam War in parts, and it was to satirize and really kind of hit the Vietnam War and talk about how war is hell. And any of the films, we've watched several things on World War II, and we're seeing things that were so patriotic, whereas for the Vietnam era, you're seeing Apocalypse Now, Platoon, Full Metal Jacket, Deer Hunter, First Blood, all those other movies, and none of those have those same patriotic themes that you were seeing from the earlier World War II films. And so that's where we're seeing the big change and the difference. And so why we're talking about this tonight? Well, we're getting ready to bring the traveling Vietnam wall and the wall that heals. And part of the reason for that is the Vietnam veterans are starting to get to an age where it's harder to travel. And part of it is not everybody will go to Washington, D.C. to see the Vietnam Wall. But if you bring it into your community, if you bring it within an hour of them, they'll travel to see it. And so one of the things that the Vietnam Wall represents isn't just the Vietnam veterans, it's their kids. Vietnam service members were exposed to chemicals that have lifelong effects to their children and had altered their DNA. And the impacts of Vietnam are still felt to this day on genetics for families. It's being felt on as they age, their long-term care. Just so much damage had been done to these Vietnam veterans that these effects are still going forward. And part of it is as Iraq, Afghanistan, OEF, OIF veterans were trying to bring more forward to help support the Vietnam veterans, because we realize, okay, we are more in common than you had in common with World War II. And so we're trying to honor their service and at the same time realize that some of these connections and some of these things will go past any kind of sands of time. And so we're trying to shine a light on that. So upcoming, we are going to be doing some streams from the wall while we have it here in Edmond. And we want to cover some of that because we don't want you guys to miss out on any of the stuff we do. Let me pull up here this calendar of events that we have that's going to be absolutely amazing. We have a little bit of coverage of a lot of things. So on May 14th at 9 a.m., we're going to have a Native American Vietnam Service Recognition Ceremony. And the reason why we're recognizing the nations of Oklahoma and their service in Vietnam is the Native Americans served at a higher percentage than any other ethnic group, but received very little acknowledgement. So we are going to be acknowledging all the tribes, the 39 tribes of Oklahoma and their service to our country during Vietnam. For a lot of them, do I think it's starting to fade from the public memory? I don't think it's necessarily starting to fade from the public memory, but I think there have been so many conflicts since then that it's kind of going, people think of Vietnam now how people in my age bracket thought of World War II. It was this old historic thing, and don't look at it quite the same. And that's part of the reason we're trying to draw this back forward. And so on May 14th at 9 a.m., we're going to be acknowledging the Native American Vietnam Veterans Services at the Wall. At 6 p.m. on May 14th, we're going to be doing a Vietnam Veterans Welcome Home ceremony. On May 15th at 6 p.m., we're going to be honoring the Hmong SGU units. Those are the special guerrilla units for the Hmong people who are help fighting alongside the U.S. service members and the CIA. On May 16th at 9 p.m., we have a Light Up the Night Oklahoma County MIA tribute, immediately followed by a tribute to the nurses who stayed with our service members while they were being held back, and several of them were killed as they stayed with their service members and end up having their names up there on the list. So as we're kind of looking through some of this, we're going to be putting these up there on our streams. We're also going to be uploading some 360 videos, some from the wall coming down Route 66. Some of them are going to be from the wall, so you'll be able to see, even if you don't live in Edmond, you'll be able to see an up close and personal tour of the wall. And there's just so much that we have coming up. So it's going to interrupt all the streams that we do for the next week. But you can still tune in live to see all of the stuff that we have going on, be part of the wall while we have it here. You're going to be hearing from Recon Sarge at the wall. You'll be hearing from me, Neptunus Rex at the wall. You'll be hearing from one of our newest, Sailor Sasquatch, from the wall, as well as we're going to be covering different things while the wall is here. And so the streams may be a little less regular and be jumping back and forth and kind of hitting through some different areas. But we will be covering all of what we can from the wall. There are going to be some great 360-degree videos uploaded, so we don't want you to miss those either. But that is what our focus is going to be on for the next week or so. So be prepared for that. Our streams are going to be messed up from their normal broadcast, but they're going to be even more impactful. They're going to be even more up close and personal, and you'll get to see us and talk to us a little bit more about things that are going on with the Vietnam Wall, and it is why it is there. But we are going to have to hop off because we have a meeting here in a few minutes about the wall. And so until next time, stay strong, stay true, stay Frankie. We'll be seeing you guys here all this next week, and you may even see some of our faces. But until then, stay Frankie.